We're going to get going on a masking exercise. It's in your book on page 46. And what we're doing is learning how to work with a piping bag and work with a cake dummy or masking a cake, which are essential skills for any pastry roll. I'm using fake whipped topping for this. So not whipped cream, because the heat from my hands will melt the whipped cream and I won't have much practice time. Using something like Cool Whip or NutraWhip, I suggest buying NutraWhip because you're not paying for air, will be an excellent practice substance. It is not good to eat. It is whipped oil. I do not suggest eating it or using it in baked goods, but it's wonderful to practice with. If you are a fan of buttercream or frostings, you could use that in replacement here. I have an industrial size jug whipped up here. So I'm looking for stiff whipped cream consistency that's generally soft on my hands so that I can practice without exhausting my muscles and hurting myself. So that's what I've got in this bowl. This would be the same as your NutraWhip in a grocery store. This is the lovely stuff that Tim Hortons puts on their drinks. It's whipped oil. Let's use real whipped cream when we're going to eat it, but practice with this. So I've got, again, I like a disposable piping bag. I find them easier to work with. You can reuse them. I just find them safer than cloth bags because cloth bags can harbor bacteria if you're not treating them properly. This is a 21-inch piping bag. Yes, it looks monstrous, but trust me, it's easier to work with. When I'm filling a piping bag, I don't want it to ooze out the end while I'm filling it. So it's important to lock the piping bag's tip. By doing that, I twist the bag, and right where the twist is, I push that into the piping tip, creating a plug with the bag so it will not leak out. When you're filling your piping bag, it's so important to pull the piping bag back halfway. As you can see, that's why a bigger piping bag is ready. You just hold it open and hope for the best. It's never the best. It always turns out a big old mess. So halfway down and flip it inside out. The one thing is, if you get, especially this whipped topping on the exterior of the piping bag, it's going to melt and make an oily consistency on the piping bag. And it's really hard to hold on to a slippery piping bag. So all I can say is less is more when filling it. We're not aiming to fill the thing completely, just give us something to work with. So I'm going to scoop up some of my whipped cream, and I'm going to run it on the web of my thumb. So you can see I have my hand between the fold, and I can wipe on the web of my thumb so I can fill up the piping bag. You can see it's getting full, and every time I add, I press down and pull back. Okay? Now I'm going to do a whole bunch of different piping techniques. There are some that I find people are better at than others. This is like learning how to write again. You're going to all be bad until you practice more. The only way to get better is repetition and practice. So this is our instrument, and today is our first day in music class. So it's going to sound and look horrible. That doesn't mean you're bad at it. It just means you have to practice at it. So every type of shape I'm doing, I suggest you do one entire baking sheet. What I do when I'm done is I pick up my parchment paper, fold it over, and squeeze it into my bowl of cream again, and then just keep reusing the same batch. You might go through a bunch of parchment paper, but your piping skills will be so wonderful, it'll be worth it. So first we learn how to hold a piping bag properly. I'm right-handed, so I'm going to use my right hand. Excuse me, I got some dust on it. I'm going to use my right hand to hold the top of the piping bag. It's important to clamp right where the cream and the bag start. Clamp with your thumb and index finger and rotate the bag. I'm still holding on to that twist. It's just getting tighter. Then I want to use that hand to cup the filling. I see people piping like this, trying to push It's better to squeeze and control your squeeze when your hand is full. You can see how tight that lock is. It's not going anywhere, okay? So squeeze and cup the piping bag. Then when we are ready to pipe, we pull the tip forward. It will have an empty chasm there. So to fill up my piping bag, I clamp my thumb and my index finger together and rotate the bag, and you can watch that cream just move up. Just like so, okay? So first thing, probably one of the hardest things, is a straight line. The main thing when we're doing a straight line is that we want to keep the bag off, or the piping tip off the parchment. I want to be slightly above it so I can land the stream as I'm piping. If my stream curls, I'm squeezing faster or harder than I'm moving. And if I have broken pieces to my line, it means I am not squeezing hard enough and moving too fast. So we start and we allow it to draw one straight line. Oop. See? More you do, the better you get. So just like so. I also often move my entire body. I rotate with the piping bag. I find it's a lot easier to move your whole body for a fluid motion versus sitting and having a bit of a rough finish. So after you've done a full tray of lines, you can move to the shell. We're going to keep our piping bag on the same angle. But as I'm doing it, I'm going to do a bit of a rocking pattern up and down while I'm moving back and forth. So we go forward, back. So that's a separated shell. And if I'm going to be getting into the world of cake decorating, a shell border is often used on cakes. So instead of taking large jumps in between, I'm going to connect or overlap my shells. And you can see how that looks like the classic birthday cake finish. So that is a shell border. You can change the angles of your shells as you're piping, which can create things like hearts. So doing two shells side by side, you can see I create a little heart. It's all about the angle that you're holding the piping bag, the distance from the parchment paper, and the constant pressure on the back of the piping bag. You see that whenever I run out of filling in my hand, I twist to fill up here so it's easier. Okay? Once you're good at all the piping going sideways, we want to try doing some straight up and down. These are very classic shapes. Kisses are probably the most common, where I'm just going to pipe and quickly move up to release. So having my piping tip a little bit off the parchment paper, I do not want it touching or I'll have a flat kiss. Ooh. So just some kisses. Now on average, when you do these, they all have different heights and sizes, but once you keep repeating, you're just going to get better and better. So once we've got the kisses done, we can start working in roses, rosettes, and double rosettes. So roses, I find my personal favorite. I start in the center and do a concentric circle around it, moving to the outside. So the rose starts in the center and moves to the outside. So start. You can see these little roses. Now the secret to having a nice smooth end is to stop squeezing but continue the motion so that the filling is not coming out, but it is continuing the motion. So rosettes, they're from the center moving out. You can see how they look like little roses. If I'm doing a rosette, what I need to do, roses here are from center out. Rosettes are from outside in. So exactly the same motion, but starting from the outside, inside. Outside, inside. Outside, inside. And it's hard to see the difference, but there is a difference. And a double rosette is when I don't stop after the first rotation, I do a second rotation, still from the outside in. So outside. The top of a cupcake is usually a double rosette. So if you can practice doing each one of these designs, one tray at a time, until they look consistent in size and shape. And the only way to get there is to practice, practice, practice. Have fun piping. For decorating a cake, we are going to need a turntable. This is the number one piece of equipment you're going to need. You can use a Lazy Susan in replacement of this, but these heavy bottom industrial turntables are worth their weight in gold if you purchase them. So they might be pricey, but they last forever. Or you can get wooden or plastic ones as well. Many different things you can get. I like to use non-slip drawer liner. So this is what you get at the dollar store. It's just sort of a non-slip pad so that when I put my cake dummy on top, it won't slide around from me. Another thing is a cake dummy. So in the college, we have custom ones made that are glued to these boards, and we wash them in the dish pit. So they're just practice dummies. And as we're not eating our fake whipped cream, it's fine to keep using these over and over. For you, I do suggest going to a bulk barn or a cake supply store and buying a styrofoam cake dummy and gluing it to either your turntable. You can use some hot glue and it will pop off after. But it is important to have it stuck because it doesn't weigh as much as a cake does because it's styrofoam. So if I start pushing this with a palette knife and I don't have it anchored in any way, it's just going to slide off my part or off my table. So it's important to glue it down. Another thing we need is a palette knife. So a palette knife is your weapon for decorating your cake. It is going to be your smoother and your shaper. I find some students need other tools as well. If you can't keep this straight up and down to get a nice straight side to your cake, you can use a bench scraper as well to hold it. But I'm going to show you guys the proper way, the right way. To decorate a cake, there are 3 steps. It is incredibly important to stick to the 3 steps in the order that they are in to get to the final product. If I start changing my motions, if I start changing the way I'm coming at the cake or go back to one of the first steps when I'm on the 3rd step, no matter what, you'll regret it. So 3 steps and you're done. Again, the only way to get better at this is repetition, repetition, repetition. That's why you need the styrofoam dummy and the fake whipped cream so you can just practice all day till you're tired. It's very, very therapeutic, so I enjoy it. So step 1, I call step 1, create a mushroom top. So I'm going to take my whipped cream. I might call it buttercream here and there because I usually use buttercream. I'm going to take my whipped topping and I'm going to pile it up on top. More is better when you're learning. And then once you've got the motions down, you can start reducing the amount of cream you're using. My palette knife is going to be an extension of my arm. So it's important that I have something like my finger on it, keeping it straight with my hand. So if I need to change angles, I'm changing angles with my wrist, not my hand. My hand stays straight, okay? And the motion is a lot like a conductor does motions back and forth in sort of a waving-like pattern. The most important thing is when I'm pushing my buttercream, I have to rotate my palette knife so that I am favoring the large amount of cream instead of cutting into it, cutting back. I want to flip towards it. In fact, if you do this properly, there should be no cream on the top of your palette knife, okay? So what I'm going to do is use that rocking motion very, very gently, rotating side to side. You see I just flip my wrist and I slowly push this till it hangs over the top. Again, if I don't have enough to cover the edge, I can just grab a little bit more because more is a lot easier to work with than less. And you rock from side to side until all the cream hangs over the edge like a mushroom top. So that's why this is create a mushroom top. You can see it's hanging over the entire edge. Stage number 2, I call it building a wall. What you want to do is get some of your cream on the end of your palette knife. I don't have it on the other side, just there. And I like to start away from myself and pull, but I've seen people do it from other areas. If you find this too difficult, you can use a piping bag and just pipe all up the sides. But this is the proper way without dirtying a piping bag. So cream on the palette knife and rocking motion as well. Now, I also like to sort of put this image of pushing a wave of cream around the cake. Here is my wave, this buildup. And if I notice my wave is getting short, then I'm going to feed it by grabbing more. The idea here is to cover all the blue. We don't want to see any blue of our cake dummy. That's why the college uses colored dummies, so that we can see the thickness of the cream. Okay, so I have put cream all the way around, but when I use the term create a standing wall, what I'm actually referring to is the edge of the cake. I want the cream to be higher than all the flat level on top. So it looks like there's a little wall standing all the way around the cake. And the way I do that is holding my palette knife straight up and down on a bit of a V pattern to the cake so that I'm not straight out like this. I'm a little bit angled. And I just start rotating while running my palette knife around. And you can see that this sort of small little wall is climbing up the cake. I don't want to do this too much because I will reveal the blue underneath. If there is areas where it is below the level of the cake, your edge won't be crisp, it will be rounded. So you can always add a little bit more cream where you need it. Pipe it on if you can't pick it up on your palette knife. Okay, so that is step 2 done. Create a standing wall. If you can see, I have a wall all the way around the cake. At this point, you'll want a little damp rag to wipe your palette knife off for the final step, which I call landing the plane. This is your plane. Planes come from the sky, not below your cake, not up and over. We're coming in for a landing, but we have to take off before we run off the other side of the cake. A very light touch does this, and I can just say the more confidence you have with this motion, the better it looks. So I come in for a landing, clip that wall, and take off again. And you can see I have a really sharp edge right there. I wipe the remainder off my palette knife and then give it a wipe. Every time I land my plane, I need a clean landing, because if I have anything left here and I go to land again, I'm going to deposit that on the outside of the cake. So in, up, very lightly. You can see I wipe every time. Now, if I go in there and try to flatten the top, my first way to mushroom top or go in and do another way, I'm not going to have this perfect blank canvas. It only comes on with the order of those steps. Now we can get creative with our piping bag again. I'm just going to make the classic birthday cake. You got to learn the basics before we can get very creative. Again, just like before, I'm going to hold the piping bag with my dominant hand and make sure I have a full piping bag to work with. I can do my shell border that we learned in the piping exercise. Remember, it's just a cake dummy, so if we don't like it, we start again. So I got my classic shell border, and I want to divide this guy up. So imagine that this is your devil's food cake. What I'm going to do is do a rosette. So now I have 4 pieces. 5, 6, 7, and 8. And that is the basic cake masking. All I can tell you is don't give up, keep trying. Take a picture of your first cake. Look at it when you're frustrated, because it's going to be a lot worse than the one you're working on that when you get frustrated. Because every time you do this, it gets better. Have fun piping and masking.